Joined now by the great Jake Rowe of Dawgs HQ, and we got to check in on the Dogs. It's been a while, Jake. They blow out Florida State in the Sugar Bowl. Their roster, it looks like the guys they lost were guys that were not necessarily playing, but they've picked up some folks in the transfer portal, and we've got a 10.5 over/under win total for Georgia going into the new SEC schedule. I'm curious, how is the optimism in Athens as Georgia enters the season as the betting favorite to win the national title?
When you return a quarterback that I think a lot of people would argue, and a lot of people would argue effectively, is the best returning quarterback in the SEC, or the best returning quarterback in the country, maybe, you're always in good shape. And then you take into account, I'm looking at it right here. They're going to return roughly, about 4,000 snaps on the offensive line.
Your Run It Back series, by the way, has been fantastic. So Dawgs HQ subscribers very lucky to see exactly how many snaps every single returning player has played.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it right now, like 1,000 snaps on the offense. And I'm sorry, that's the offensive guard. They've got a lot coming back on the offensive line. You add Trevor Etienne. It's hard to imagine losing Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey and getting better. I'm not necessarily saying they're getting better at the receiver position per se, but Dylan Bell closed last season looking great. You've got Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett going into their second year of a system. They add Ben Yurosek out of Stanford to go with Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky. That's kind of what you're looking at offensively. And then defensively, I was talking to someone earlier today, just looking at the entire defense. You've got 10 guys, and I'm not going to bore everybody and name them off, but you've got 10 guys on that defense who, have played varying roles over the past, last year. 10 guys going into either their second or third year, who are big time contributors. At least 10 guys. I mean, I can think of even a couple more. So Georgia has a lot of returning talent, and that roster was deep. They did a good job of holding on to guys. They didn't really have that Jermaine Burton, A.D. Mitchell departure this year like they've had the last couple of years. And I think it's a really, really well-balanced roster that, when you start to look at, hey, where are the question marks? Well, the question mark is stuff like backup center. Who's going to be the backup center? Or maybe the biggest one is trying to figure out who's going to play star nickel and who's going to kind of play that strong safety position with Javon Bullard and Tyke Smith on their way out.
Yeah, and it is a lot of settled stuff going into spring practice. So that means that you can build depth underneath. Guys get good snaps. I don't think Tate Ratledge needs to take a whole lot of snaps in spring practice. Like, everybody knows what he is and what he can do. And Nazir Stackhouse, same thing. Those guys have played so much football for them. But the Carson Beck part of it, Georgia had this luxury coming off the first national title with Stetson Bennett coming back. How big of a deal is it to have Carson Beck back?
I go back to, when Aaron Murray kind of had that 4-year run at Georgia. And it seemed like Georgia just kind of plug and played at wide receiver because Aaron Murray elevated so well. I mean, he elevated those around him. And I think this past year, especially maybe through the first 2/3 of the season, Carson Beck was he had to lean on Brock Bowers. And when Ladd came back and Bowers was out, he had to lean on Ladd. And I think you saw toward the latter part of the season when both Ladd and Brock were either limited or missed that Tennessee game and played later on in the year, that you were kind of like, all right, now this guy might have the ability to kind of elevate those around him. And I think you have to expect that going into year 2. No longer are you looking at early in the season saying, well, the guy's just in his first start. I mean, he's got 14 of those under his belt, and he came back to do more, to build upon that resume. And, you talk about kind of what you heard about Carson as he's coming back. And one of the big reasons is, and listen, I'm sure they put together a nice NIL package for him, and I'm sure the opportunity to the
Lamborghini's nice.
Yeah, it is. The Lamborghini's great. That's got a big part of it. All right. But, you heard a lot about, hey, you got to play at Alabama. You got to play at Texas. You got to play at Ole Miss. Those are kind of legacy building type games. And I think Carson's kind of wired that way. Steady hand, all the talent in the world. I think Georgia fans have got a lot to be excited about. I said it whenever he decided he was coming back. I wrote a column and I said, listen, this guy returning, this piece of good news is going to overshadow any other piece of reasonably bad news.
Right.
Going forward, because this was the main key as far as returning. And I love the fact that he's back for Georgia. And it's just as much as that, I love the fact they returned 4 starters on the offensive line and then 3 others who played significant snaps last year.
So FanDuel set their win total at 10.5, and that's the highest in the SEC, along with Texas. Texas is also 10.5. Alabama's 9.5. Ole Miss is 9.5. The only other 10.5 schools in the country, and there's no 11s, are Ohio State and Oregon. So, that's rare air, but Georgia's obviously used to being in that rare air right now. But I look at the schedule, Jake, and I feel bad for Georgia fans because it feels like they're getting trolled by the SEC. All those years of fairly blah home schedules, you get the new SEC, everybody else's schedule improves, and Georgia's schedule is awesome in terms of competitive games. But at Alabama, at Texas, at Ole Miss, I realize a return game from last year, but still, the 3 best ones are on the road.
Yeah, I was looking at our man Jesse Simonson's way too early top 25, and Georgia plays the number 4, number 5, and number 6 teams on that list in order, basically, in September, October, and November on the road. So that's going to be tough. And that's the only reason I've got any doubt about that, 10.5, win total. I absolutely believe Georgia can go 12-0, 11-1. It can. It needs to stay healthy. It needs some good injury luck. It needs, it needs those things. But that's a tough stretch, man. That's just, there's no other way to state it. It is very difficult. Now, it's a little easier than it would have looked like maybe January 11th because, Alabama had a lot of departures and, you're no longer dealing with the boogeyman, Nick Saban anymore and kind of, the thorn he was in Georgia's side and even when they were at their best. But, it's a very, very tough schedule. And the good news for Georgia fans, and I feel confident in saying this, 2025, with the way this schedule's set up, 2025 should be a hell of a year to have season tickets at Georgia.
Yes, I would agree, especially if they're going to do, we heard the comments from Chris Del Conte, the Texas AD. If they are just going to reverse the 24 schedule, that is an incredible home schedule for Georgia.
Wow. It's tough to see them doing that, though, because that would put Ole Miss playing Georgia 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
That would be tough.
I don't know. I think it depends on how much they want to tweak. But sure. Yeah, if you can get Texas and Alabama.
Yeah, if you got Alabama and Texas at home, that would be something else. That would be pretty fun.
So the Clemson game is the kickoff game. It's in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. This feels different than the last time Georgia opened against Clemson. They opened against Clemson in the 2021 season, and it's crazy to think like JT Daniels started that game. That was the beginning of the march to the national title that finally got the monkey off Georgia's back. But it doesn't feel like Clemson is as like it's in the same echelon as Georgia anymore.
And it seemed like it kind of changed that day, right?
Yeah.
That was kind of the turning point. That was the hinge. I got all the respect in the world for Clemson's program, and I watched them several times this past year, and they dropped some games. That Florida State game comes to mind where I felt like they probably outplayed the other team. Dabo had them playing hard. He's always going to have them playing hard. He's a proven winner. They're going to be good. But the one thing I think that maybe stacks up against Clemson here is that Kirby and he kind of took this from Nick Saban. We saw it over and over and over again. Man, they get up for that first game of the year. They
yes.
really do. And, it kind of – and Kirby's gone on the record as saying this. It affects their offseason. It brings more juice and more life and more focus to the offseason. And on top of that, Kirby's not going to go take the podium in Dallas at SEC Media Days this year and give this long talk about complacency because that's not on the menu for this year. That's kind of I think we saw in the Florida State game, even with the departures, Georgia had some too, but Georgia played really well in that game. That's just, I mean,
Yeah.
I could have seen them go out and kind of go through the motions and beat Florida State and control the game, but they played extremely well that day. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that they did not really like the way it felt to lose. And that idea of there being some complacency like there has been, like there was in 2022, I don't think is a factor.
You mentioned the transfers. The Ben Urosic from Stanford is a really interesting one because 6'5", 220, kind of a similar build to Brock Bowers at tight end, where he's a little bit lighter but also faster, and they'll run. Stanford would run into rounds with him. And I'm curious about the transfer receivers because you mentioned the depth that Georgia might have at receiver. When you add Michael Jackson from USC and Colby Young from Miami, who's a big dude, like it feels like that's what Georgia needed this past year. Like I remember looking out at the SEC championship game and seeing who Georgia was lining up at receiver and thinking, oh man, they've got some problems here. Maybe next year they don't have those problems because they are as deep as they need to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely helps. And with the receiver position, what they really did. And I remember Barton Simmons now at Vanderbilt. I worked with him for a long time at 24/7 Sports. And Barton used to say that it's not necessarily important that you get a wide receiver that checks off all the boxes. Those guys don't grow on trees. But it is very important that with your receiver room, you check off all the boxes. And the one thing that Georgia has been missing past couple of years, I would say, is that big physical presence at wideout. Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint, I think, went to the Senior Bowl, measured in at under 6'2", which is by no means small. He was definitely a physical presence, a go-get-it type guy, but he wasn't Colby Young. He wasn't 6'5", 220 pounds. And I do think that kind of physical presence helped there. They went and got, London Humphreys, who is is like a 10-500 meter guy and a big time speedster that Georgia saw firsthand. They got him, and that checks off the box. Michael Jackson, he's kind of he's almost a little bit Dylan Bell like. They've kind of already got a little bit of a guy like that, which makes sense because Bell's going to probably be Georgia's next man up at that Ladd McConkey flanker position. So, Michael Jackson kind of brings a frame and a build there that get the ball to him in space, see what he can do. But yeah, Georgia did a really good job with that. And Urosic is the one that I like the most. I mean, take out Trevor Etienne as far as the offensive weapons goes, because I do believe that is the most important one. But Urosic, man, I mean, he's a guy that in 2021 had 650 yards receiving, 648, something like that. And if you kind of extrapolate and push that all the way to a 15-game season, you're talking about a guy that's knocking on the door 900 yards. He's not Brock Bowers, but he can do some of the specific things that Georgia used Brock Bowers for to make them tough to defend.
Yeah, I was gonna say just having that possibility of having a tight end that you can hand off to on a jet sweep,
right,
it changes the way people have to defend you. Let's talk Trevor Etienne because he comes from Florida. Obvious breakaway talent, breakaway speed, but also good, kind of like his brother, good between the tackles with breakaway speed. The criticism at Florida was the blocking, but like go watch the Tennessee game, watch him tear away for a 70-something yard touchdown that basically put the game away. That's a lot of talent.
It is, and Georgia got a high level of play out of Dajan Edwards and Kendall Milton this past year. I wouldn't take a single thing away from those guys. Kendall Milton actually towards the end of the year when he got healthy looked like one of the better Georgia running backs of the past like 5 or 6 years. I mean, he looked really good. But Trevor Etienne brings kind of a Kenny McIntosh, Sony Michel, somewhere between those two element to the offense as far as his pass, DeAndre Swift even, as far as his pass catching and ability to, get it to him quick, see what he can do with the ball. I do think he can help Georgia with more explosives, both in the run and the pass game. Del McGee has done a really good job over the years of taking these backs in and kind of stressing to them and getting through them with a little bit of a pass blocking whisper or whatever. He's gotten some guys ready to play kind of in short order like that. And Trevor Etienne's, that's not the only guy ever that there's been a knock on at running back. They don't do it.
Exactly.
They don't do it in high school. And But I do think that that's such a massive addition for Georgia because they've had a look at him. I mean, if you've ever had a chance to watch the Real Talk podcast with Tate Ratledge and whoever else is helping him host that, one of the things that he said months ago was that, when they go into, the SEC schedule, went into the SEC schedule 2022, the thinking is that Trevor Etienne was one of the best backs on that schedule. And now he's going to wear a Georgia uniform.
It's going to be fun to watch. 10.5 is the total. Got to get through those road games. Got to win at least one of those to go over. Jake Rowe, thank you so much.
That's right, man. See ya.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.